For generations, the global imagination has associated the United Kingdom with towering prosperity, the glittering skyscrapers of London, a legacy of global empire, and the steady hum of a superpower's economy. Yet, beneath this polished facade, the UK is bleeding its most precious resource: its own people. With net emigration figures showing hundreds of thousands of British citizens packing their bags annually, including over 140,000 young professionals and working-age adults fleeing each year, the nation is experiencing a quiet, self-inflicted brain drain. This mass departure is not happening in a vacuum. It is the symptom of a fractured society, where over 3 million households battle fuel poverty. Once, vibrant towns are slipping into neglected ghost towns, and the promise of a secure future has become a luxury few can afford. Is the British dream slipping away? Or has the cost of staying simply become too high? Let's take a look at the 10 worst crisis hotspots across the UK to better understand what's really happening. Jaywick's history began in the 1930s as an affordable seaside resort for low-income residents from London, where people once hoped to enjoy a little fresh coastal air. However, under the pressure of the post-World War II housing shortage, it quickly became a permanent settlement for working-class families with low incomes. The troubling part is that the makeshift infrastructure built nearly a century ago appears to have received little to no meaningful investment or modernization right up to the present day. Large numbers of fragile wooden homes without central heating and lacking basic utilities, such as a proper drainage system, have become symbols of the area's relentless physical decline. In fact, even a familiar American home improvement retailer like Home Depot could probably provide better building materials than many of the structures still standing here today. Even more alarming, much of Jaywick lies within Flood Zone 3. Placing it directly at risk from future sea level rise. Amid the bitter cold along England's eastern coastline, residents are left wondering whether the government is deliberately allowing them to slowly sink beneath the sea, or whether the rising tide will arrive faster than public officials are willing to act. On top of that, transportation isolation has pushed the community even further into a dead end. With only one main access road, no railroad station, and extremely limited public transportation, anyone without a car is effectively trapped financially inside their deteriorating home. The feeling is much like being stranded in the middle of a deserted wilderness, with no vehicle available to rescue yourself. When you think of London, the capital of the United Kingdom, the first images that probably come to mind are the iconic Big Ben clock tower, the famous red double-decker buses, or bustling shopping districts that rival Manhattan or Rodeo Drive. Yet behind that glamorous image lies a development paradox that seems to defy all conventional logic. If you visit Newham in East London, you'll likely be stunned by the staggering levels of inequality. Situated in the heart of one of the world's most expensive metropolitan areas for both living costs and real estate, it also hides a child poverty rate that gives people pause. Around 60% of children in Newham are living in poverty after housing costs are taken into account. Let's do a quick calculation. Rent for a small apartment can reach an astonishing nearly $1,800 per month for even the most basic accommodation. At that price, a minimum wage worker's paycheck seems to disappear within the first few days of the month, turning the area into an inescapable financial trap. It feels like trying to pay a massive medical bill in the United States with nothing more than a part-time paycheck from a 7-Eleven convenience store. The sense of helplessness is almost inevitable. London's housing crisis appears to have become almost unbelievable, transforming what was once a symbol of prosperity into a major hotspot for social welfare concerns. The capital now accounts for roughly 50% of all people experiencing homelessness across the United Kingdom. To put that into perspective, about 1 out of every 45 people in the capital is struggling without permanent shelter, turning the city's glamorous streets into temporary refuge for those with nowhere else to go. Even more discouraging, social housing programs seem to exist more as promises on paper than as real solutions. The housing that does exist is often overcrowded, badly deteriorated, and nowhere near sufficient to meet the actual needs of the thousands of families waiting endlessly for a place to live. Sad, isn't it? When you see a major city respond to a financial crisis by squeezing the very culture that made it famous, you have to wonder whether public officials are really thinking clearly. In Bristol, England, the answer seems to lie in cold budget-cutting figures rather than any real sense of compassion. Severe budget deficits always seem to find the easiest target to sacrifice. And it's no surprise that arts and culture have become among the first to take the hit. This prolonged instability has quickly pushed small arts organizations and independent theaters to the brink, where the resources needed to keep operating can disappear almost overnight. Perhaps it's only when public budgets focus solely on dry balance sheets instead of the cultural value of a community that people begin to see the sharp contrast with the more flexible private funding models across the Atlantic, where major corporations like Nike and venture capital firms are willing to invest in creativity rather than stifle it. Faced with a stifling bureaucratic environment and a lack of stable financial support, there seems to be little reason for artists, actors, and designers to remain in their hometown. The appeal of more dynamic opportunities overseas has begun to call them away. Leading creative hubs in the United States, such as San Francisco and Portland, appear to welcome them with flexible incentives and abundant private funding, turning those cities into a promised land for people who still want to create and contribute. The mass departure of artists has unintentionally weakened Bristol's long-established cultural ecosystem at its core. What was once a thriving arts center has suddenly grown quiet, with fresh ideas giving way to an eerie silence. If you stop by Hartlepool in County Durham, in northeast England, you may find yourself blinking more than once, wondering whether you're standing in what was once an economic center or a wasteland abandoned by time. Today, it ranks among the areas hardest hit by economic decline, placing third nationwide for overall poverty, according to local development indicators. Even more striking, 25% of working-age adults, roughly 1 out of every 4 workers, are living in severe income poverty. They appear unable to afford even basic living expenses, let alone dream about a weekend getaway or a brand new car. The once bustling seaport and shipbuilding and maritime repair industries that were once the town's pride now seem to have faded away completely, leaving behind vast empty lots and prolonged economic stagnation, much like a JCPenney shopping center that closed years ago and was never cleaned up. The long-term collapse of the heavy industries that defined the last century appears to have left Hartlepool with an inheritance of unemployment passed down from one generation to the next. Many people born and raised here seem to have little chance of securing stable employment that provides a decent income. The situation has only worsened as years of healthcare and public service cuts under austerity policies have pushed hospitals and local medical centers into severe overcrowding, leaving them with shockingly critical staff shortages. And when the public healthcare system begins to fail, it is older adults who bear the bitterest consequences. Seniors and people living with chronic illnesses have unintentionally become unwilling hostages of a healthcare system that is steadily weakening. They struggle alone within the walls of their homes without timely medical care, creating a deep sense of insecurity, much like being stranded in a remote rural area of the United States where your cell phone has no signal to call for emergency help. When a town loses its economic lifeblood, it seems to lose its soul as well. In Hartlepool, a culture of resignation appears to have taken root, where success is no longer measured by contributing to the community, but by finding a way to escape the town at any cost. If you're thinking about building a career in Middlesbrough, you may need to rethink what job security really means. The employment rate here appears to stand at only about 64.4%, significantly below the national average, making the search for a livable income more difficult than ever. Even more concerning is what economists refer to as economic inactivity. Nearly 1/3 of the working-age population, 29.2%, to be exact, appears to have completely withdrawn from the labor market. When a community loses its core work ethic, its education and training system seems to lose direction as well. The lack of successful local role models means many children grow up seeing little beyond unemployed neighbors or families, struggling to stretch every dollar just to cover everyday living expenses. Government assistance packages and leveling up initiatives appear never to have addressed the root causes of the problem. While local funding for education and public safety has been severely reduced, unintentionally, creating conditions that allow crime to increase. As a result, young people seem to have few options left except to leave. They don't abandon their hometown because they no longer love it, but because staying often means accepting a life of stagnation surrounded by abandoned, moss-covered lots. They move to more dynamic economic centers in search of genuine opportunity and independence, much like a young engineer leaving rural America for the fast-paced life of a major city. What they leave behind is only the long silence of abandoned steel mills, a reminder of what happens when a once proud industrial past is forced into obscurity. Here's something you may not know about Blackpool. The actual healthy life expectancy, HLE, for men in Blackpool is just 50.9 years and 51.8 years for women. That's nearly a decade below the national average, turning what should be the peak years of a person's career and life experiences into years spent struggling with illness. Compared with states like Florida or Texas, where people often enjoy their 50s with weekend golf outings or outdoor adventures, living in Blackpool seems less like a life and more like an invisible sentence. The concentration of neighborhoods ranked among the most deprived in England under the Index of Multiple Deprivation, IMD, has driven significantly higher rates of premature death and chronic disease, creating a startling stain on the reputation of a country that once prided itself on being one of Europe's leaders. Blackpool was once a proud vacation destination for Britain's working class, a place to relax and unwind after exhausting days spent in steel mills. Today, however, it is little more than a shadow of its former self. Factories have closed, the seaside tourism industry has lost its appeal, and many of its accommodations have been replaced by rundown boarding houses that resemble worn-out mobile homes abandoned along lonely highways in the American Midwest. The rock-bottom prices of old boarding houses and aging hotels have unintentionally turned the town into a refuge for society's most vulnerable populations from across the country, placing an overwhelming burden on social services that were already operating with depleted budgets. Don't be surprised to learn that Blackpool's death rates related to substance use, drug abuse, and alcohol misuse are several times higher than the national average. The atmosphere that lingers behind those old, weathered hotels is not the feeling of a relaxing vacation, it's the smell of resignation. Even familiar fast food chains like McDonald's or highway rest stops across America can sometimes feel more vibrant and safer than the dark alleyways of this seaside town. In Sheffield, England, the answer seems to be reflected in cold real estate numbers and an urban landscape that is steadily changing. Imagine being packed into a traditional terraced house with limited space, where living areas range from only about 688 to 1,087 square feet, while the average home costs around £199,000, roughly $268,000, far beyond what many working people can realistically afford. That's not a comfortable choice. It's more like voluntarily imprisoning yourself inside a cramped concrete box, completely lacking meaningful green space or a real backyard where you can simply enjoy some fresh air. Don't you think so? The gap between the area's average home price, now climbing to around £221,000, and the actual purchasing power of first-time buyers seems to be widening into a chasm that's becoming increasingly impossible to bridge, as young families face the harsh reality that their modest incomes simply cannot buy a decent place to live. The dream of owning a proper home suddenly feels farther away than ever. While it's easy to picture spacious American neighborhoods with home improvement giants like Home Depot and Lowe's nearby, people here are struggling inside aging buildings, where every square foot comes at an exorbitant price. That sense of confinement not only wears people down, but also fuels a growing desire to find somewhere with more space to breathe. Dissatisfaction with cramped living conditions appears to have driven many families to make difficult but decisive choices, accepting losses by selling their homes in Sheffield and looking for opportunities overseas. The appeal of the wide-open spaces across the ocean is undeniably powerful. So it's hard to blame the people who have already left, or those who are planning to, isn't it? This may come as a shock to you. Bradford has 119 neighborhoods or wards classified as skill-poor areas. The local workforce appears to lack the digital and professional skills needed to access the high-value industries of the 21st century. They seem almost powerless in the face of today's rapidly evolving economy, like trying to operate a clunky 1950s printing press in a world that has already embraced Microsoft's cloud computing. This backwardness is not merely a local tragedy. It is a clear indication of how the education and training system has left people behind. People often say that education is the only ticket out of poverty. But in Bradford, that ticket seems to have lost its value long ago. The local education system has repeatedly come under heavy criticism for becoming outdated and completely disconnected from the real needs of today's job market. As a result, tens of thousands of adult workers remain permanently trapped in low-paying manual labor and contract work, taking the hardest hits whenever the economy experiences even minor downturns. It's like trying to apply for a job at an Amazon distribution center with a degree from a university that shut down decades ago. The disappointment is almost inevitable. And when adults become trapped in the cycle of low wages, it is the next generation that suffers the most. The direct consequences of economic stagnation have pushed more than 40,000 children in Bradford into severe food insecurity. It's difficult to imagine that in one of Europe's most developed countries, children still go to school with empty stomachs, deprived of even the most basic nutrition. The failure of the system seems to have turned their childhood into an endless cycle of worrying about their next meal instead of dreaming about their future. If you were in this situation, would you choose to leave like they did? Let us know in the comments below. Birmingham. Here, unemployment has climbed sharply, reaching 7.6% by mid-2026, seemingly reflecting the city's widespread economic stagnation. The purchasing power of the middle class has eroded rapidly under the combined pressure of high inflation, soaring living costs, and increasingly restrictive tax policies. When compared with America's thriving retail hubs, the contrast becomes especially striking. While shopping centers backed by major financial institutions and leading retail brands such as Walmart and Costco continue to generate steady revenue thanks to strong consumer spending, people here are struggling to cut back on even the most basic expenses just to make ends meet. The growing number of vacant storefronts at iconic shopping destinations like Bullring paints an especially bleak picture. Major retail chains have been pulling out one after another, closing locations to reduce losses and unintentionally turning what were once bustling commercial landmarks into lifeless, cold, concrete structures. This gloomy scene reflects the inability of the traditional shopping mall model to keep pace with today's rapidly changing economy. Unable to withstand mounting financial pressure, these once proud landmarks have been reduced to little more than empty shells of their former selves. Are you surprised to see London on this list? Like, come on, it's London. How did it end up being here? Well, when the average spending the majority of their income just to afford a cramped living space no bigger than a matchbox. That reality, combined with gloomy skies and persistent rain throughout the year, creates an atmosphere of bleakness and hopelessness. While it's easy to think of the openness, spaciousness, and exceptional earning potential found in major American cities such as New York and Los Angeles, where leading financial and technology companies like JP Chase and Apple provide workers with a more livable and prosperous environment in London, every effort seems to be worn away by exorbitant costs and the lack of room for personal and professional growth. Record-high tax policies and tighter fiscal measures aimed at the wealthy seem to be doing an excellent job of driving capital away, prompting thousands of millionaires, entrepreneurs, and investors to pack their bags and leave London. Young people and members of the creative workforce have little interest in burying their futures in such a bureaucratic and restrictive system. Instead, they are moving to the United States in search of higher salaries paid in U.S. dollars and a fairer environment where genuine talent is properly rewarded. The departure of these brightest minds has left behind an enormous void, causing the appeal of what was once one of the world's leading financial centers to decline at an alarming pace. In the end, the polished image of the United Kingdom turns out to be pieced together from the lives of people whose circumstances are falling apart day by day. This decline has never been just about dry inflation statistics displayed on television screens. It reflects deep fractures within the country's social structure and the public's confidence in it. When hundreds of thousands of young people feel compelled to leave their homeland simply to build a future elsewhere, it forces us to rethink what prosperity really means. A wealthy nation cannot forever hide its internal decay behind a handful of gleaming skyscrapers or multi-billion-dollar real estate developments downtown, while impoverished communities and ghost towns continue to fade in obscurity. What do you think about this situation? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd really like to hear your honest perspective. And don't forget to hit the like button to help this video reach more people. Share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you won't miss our upcoming in-depth analyses.